Time. Time is running out. Calling all patriots and lovers of our constitutionally protected, God-given, self-evident, inalienable rights in Tennessee and the United States of America. If you are sickened by the liberty-eroding activities of a government that hates you, then it is time to wake up. If you are fed up with the tyrannical leadership on display by all levels of government, now is the time to listen to your reveille call. If you are equally tired of the political class, the new aristocracy, lying to you in their pursuit of power and control, now is the time to take a stand in the arena. Please welcome your host, Larry Linton, U.S. Navy veteran and candidate for Tennessee House of Representatives, to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's episode of the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Today's episode on leadership, we will be interviewing somebody that has been an outstanding advocate for restoring Tennesseans' constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms. Mr. John Harris, the Executive Director of the Tennessee Firearms Association, joins the podcast once again. We'll discuss some legislative priorities for the TFA and the new General Assembly and other things. I hope you enjoy the interview as much as I did talking with this fine gentleman. So, here we go.
Thank you for having me this morning. Yeah, I'm John Harris. I'm actually an attorney practicing in Nashville, Tennessee. But for the last 28 years, I've served in a volunteer capacity as the executive director for the Tennessee Firearms Association. And the TFA is a nonprofit organization that's recognized by the IRS as a 501c4 issue advocacy group. And we focus on Second Amendment issues primarily, almost exclusively Second Amendment issues in Tennessee. And then connected with that, we get involved in other areas that are of interest or significance to gun owners. And that may be things like some 10th Amendment issues from time to time, some 4th Amendment issues from time to time, issues pertaining to zoning regulations for gun ranges, and even hunting, like access to public lands for recreational shooting and hunting issues. So that's typically what we pursue as an organization. And then we have a separate organization called TFA-LAC, Tennessee Firearms Association Legislative Action Committee, which is a state PAC that we use to support financially candidates that are running for office that we think are going to, make a difference if we can get them elected.
Good deal. I think we need a lot of them, but what I believe is that it shouldn't take PAC money to get people to actually look at the plain language of our Constitution and, legislate from that position. So
you're exactly right. But the sad fact is it does. I mean, when I started doing this almost 3 decades ago, really any citizen had the ability to run a credible race, particularly for the state house, because the vote turnout on the state house races were typically maybe 10 to 15,000 voters. You could door knock, on a long enough election cycle. A lot of that, you could do public speaking. You could get on radio, even if you didn't get on local TV. And you could raise, 10 to 15,000 maybe, and run a credible race with mailers and postcards and stuff like that. And it has become, unfortunately, in Tennessee, a situation where too many legislative seats and other elected seats at the state level are really bought and sold by those who can afford it. I'll give you an example. We were involved in going after Deborah Maggart, who was the number 3 person in the House on the Republican side back in 2012. And we spent a lot of money, TFA-LAC did, on that race, spent a lot of effort. NAGAR, National Association for Gun Rights, came in and spent money. The NRA spent money. All of the money spent by these gun rights organizations was to defeat Maggard. And what we learned after the fact, even though we successfully beat her with a Tea Party leader, Courtney Rogers, a retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, is that race consumed about $750,000 a decade ago just on a state house race, fighting over 15,000 votes.
Wow.
And so you see now this situation where, a House incumbent, it's not uncommon to see them, particularly if they're popular with the Commerce, Chamber of Commerce or leadership funding sources, having access to $300,000 or $400,000 to defend their seat for reelection. And then challengers are left, unfortunately, with the fact that they may have to raise $100,000 plus just to be able to have a voice in the election cycle.
Yeah, I could definitely see that from my end. Rival for this seat is definitely much better funded. I'm mostly self-funded. Somebody told me once that politics is a rich man's game, and the answer to that is, I'm not rich and I don't play games, so I'm just going to do this for the people to restore their sovereign position over the states and the federal government. And that needs a strong Second Amendment advocate.
It does. And even if you have one, because we have candidates all across the state like yourself that would be much better than the incumbent, because the incumbents have proven their characteristics for failure when it comes to representing the constitutional parameters that are at issue.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately for most of the incumbents, whether they're Democrat or Republican, they're beholden to, and their voting records show that they support their agendas, their priorities, other than constitutional principles. So they're, if they're on the left, they're going after Planned Parenthood or, not corporate welfare, but general welfare at taxpayer expense. And they're pursuing, Nancy Pelosi's type of agendas in Tennessee now. But on the right, what we're seeing is instead of doing things like passing real constitutional carry, which has, as a practical matter, zero budget impact on Tennesseans to restore to them a constitutionally protected right. Instead of doing that, they give a $1 billion to Ford to come to West Tennessee to build a electric vehicle plant. They give a $500 million to Nashville to build or to go towards the funding of a new, domed stadium for the Titans. And what they've done is they've pursued Chamber of Commerce issues on the Republican side at a much higher rate of interest and passage than they have focused on fundamental constitutional rights, because they need to really get those constitutional principles cleaned up, fixed, and shored up in Tennessee before they ever spend a bunch of time or money on these Chamber of Commerce issues.
Absolutely. You remember what Rush Limbaugh called the Chamber of Commerce?
Refresh me.
He called them the Chamber of Commies.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Their God is cash flow and profits rather than, the true God or even basic constitutional principles that the founders, I think, in many respects, put in place based on the wisdom and guidance that they had from him.
Oh, absolutely. Our constitutions are biblically founded. All of our founding documents are.
Yes.
So
true.
And anything that deviates from that, we already know what the reason for it is.
Yeah.
So what do you see as the legislative priorities for you guys, this or your organization, this coming new General Assembly?
Well, that's a very fair question, and I'll start off by saying I started doing this back in the era when the Democrats had the supermajority, in the mid-'90s. And we were able to pass gun laws then with a combination of Republicans who were in the minority and really fought for and at least showed more effort towards constitutional advances, and rural Democrats, which are not the Democrats of today. They were really yellow dog, Democrats that were Southerners in heritage, and that had a lot of core principles that reflected Republican concepts. I mean, think about it. John F. Kennedy is probably more of a conservative than many Republicans serving in office today.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the Democrat Party today would try to cancel JFK.
Well, they absolutely. And in fact, they have. Look at John DeBerry, a Church of Christ preacher in Memphis, did a great job, served as a Democrat, but he stood up for right to life. And so they disowned him and blocked him from running for re-election. They tried to do the same thing this year to Representative John Mark Wendell, who's been there 30-plus years, serves in the state guard as a colonel, and they were going to, let him requalify and then decertify him as a bona fide Democrat that would have taken him off the ballot. So he's running over in Overton County as an independent, and I think he's going to get reelected as an independent.
Well, that's good. That gives me hope.
Yeah, I mean, there's that opportunity out there, and it's where the Democrats have gone so far. But what I was going to say is, when we started off back in the mid-'90s, we were talking about Vermont carry, which is what we call constitutional carry today. We were talking about getting rid of gun-free zones. We were talking about changing the laws in Tennessee, predominantly statutes and local regulations, so that the Second Amendment's guarantee of keeping and bearing arms was, in fact, the reality in Tennessee. And for years, the Republicans, who were the minority party, would pull us aside and say, John, if TFA helps us get the majority, gets the control, we're going to fix this, and we're going to, because us, we're the party of the Second Amendment. And in fact, at that time, the ones that were there and their voting records and their willingness to carry bills, there was a lot of truth in that. But what happened is in 2010, Bill Haslam comes in and runs for governor and essentially spends $17 million buying it instead of earning it. Right. And then at the same time, the House and the Senate had done it a few years earlier, became Republican majorities and quickly became super majorities. And what we saw was the composition of the Republican caucuses in the General Assembly went from the conservative agenda-driven focus, they moved left. And they essentially took the conservatives and the constitutionalists in this state for granted and this came right from Deborah Maggart, on the theory that, well, you're going to vote for us anyhow, and if we want to get our supermajority shored up, then we've got to advance issues that are important to moderates and centrists and people that don't know if they're a Democrat or a Republican, because we want their votes. So it was driven by power rather than principle once they came into power in 2010. And what we've seen in the last 12 years is that without exception, or without many exceptions, the Republican Party, once it got control, did not honor the promises and assurances it had made prior to 2010 that upon becoming king, so to speak, they would fix the problems in Tennessee on Second Amendment issues. So as we move into 2023, we're looking at, we need to still pass real constitutional carry. And there's a lot in the legislature that'll tell you incorrectly that we have it now. And it's a reflection of the fact that they just don't know what real constitutional carry is. We want to see, and in large part, we've asked for this for decades now, but we think there's an increased urgency with the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court this summer in the Bruen case to eliminate gun-free zones, to eliminate restrictions on handgun only, to repeal state regulatory provisions that say no one can have a handgun anywhere near a daycare facility. I mean, we're just covered up with these prohibitions and restrictions that Democrats and bureaucrats have imposed on us. And yet, for reasons that have no good justification, the Republicans over the last 12 years, as an entity, not necessarily individuals, but as an entity, the Republican caucus has refused to take action on.
Absolutely. And that Bruen case is a ripe opportunity now to do all this, but I just don't see it happening because the party, like you said, is about power, not principle anymore.
Yeah, in many respects, it's power over principle, and even if you got down to the principle level, there's a serious question as to what those principles now are and what controls them, and is that the Constitution, is that biblical standards, or is that principles that are important predominantly to the Chamber of Commerce and big business?
Right, and they're principles that, like I've said in the past, they're as firm as like a Twizzler stick. They change with whatever is happening in society. Principles are principles, and they should be foundational and unchanging.
Yes.
And so, well, that's my gut feel on it, and that's why I decided to jump into running for office, because, like I said, both parties they're getting to be two sides of the same coin. They don't represent any close semblance to what is constitutional anymore. It's all about party power and control, and whatever it takes to get there. Constitution be damned.
Well, exactly. And, you look back in Tennessee's history, and this is an unfortunate fact, but it's a true fact. TFA was an amicus party, which means we filed a brief in the U.S. Supreme Court with Gun Owners of America and some others as brief writers in the Bruen case, and so we had an active role in supporting what ultimately became the Bruen decision. And as a result of that, I was listening remotely to the live stream of the oral arguments back last November when they took place on the Bruen case, and heard, live the question and answers from the judges and the responding attorneys. And it was a point in time in that discussion where one of the justices asked the attorneys representing the state of New York, can you give us some historical examples of states that have a long history of regulating and restricting the power or the capability of their citizens to carry firearms for self-defense? And literally one of the first states they mentioned was the state of Tennessee. Now, for Tennessee to be a southern state, and for movies like Shooter with Mark Wahlberg to say that Tennessee is the patron state of shooting stuff. We've got a reputation as a volunteer state, as a gun-friendly state. And I think it's true with respect to the citizens on the street. But our government in Tennessee has a long history, one that was referenced in Bruen, one that's been brought up in even decisions since Bruen, of having a long history of having laws, some of which were race-based, many of which are just unjustifiable under the Second Amendment, that basically prohibit gun owners from carrying firearms for self-defense. And in fact, as we speak this morning, that law is still on the books. In Tennessee, we have a statute, 39-17-1307A1, that makes it a crime for anyone to carry a firearm with the intent to go armed. There's only two elements: carrying a firearm with the intent to go armed. Now, you hear legislators and Bill Lee say, well, no, we're a constitutional carry state. But the fact is, they either don't understand or they're intentionally misrepresenting to the people when they say that what we are. What Tennessee has is a law, unlike most other states, that makes it a crime to have a gun for armed purposes anywhere. And then we have a list and a set of defenses that you, as the citizen, have the burden of demonstrating to a police officer, to a district attorney, and ultimately to a judge that gives you a statutory defense to that criminal charge. And those defenses include things like you're in your own home. You're on your own property if you're a landowner. You're at your own place of business, that you have a handgun permit, or that under the law that passed with Bill Lee's leadership, so to speak, in 2021, that you meet all 7 of the tests that apply under that law to being able to carry in public. But all of them, the problem is all of those, whether it's your own home, you have a permit, whatever, they're all defenses. They're all statutory defenses to a criminal charge, and the burden is on the citizen to show the facts that warrant the defense. But in every instance, if the officer so chooses, that individual could be arrested or cited or charged simply for carrying with the intent to go armed, even on their own property.
That's just terrible, and it's antithetical to the U.S. Constitution and the first law of nature, right, of self-defense.
Oh, absolutely. But yet, go across the state, look at the campaign literature, probably from your opponent even, and they'll tell you that Tennessee's constitutional carry, that they voted to support constitutional carry, and it's just not true.
Right.
Now they may be, and I think this is true of a lot of them, they may just be saying what they've been told the effect of that law was, and so it's a question of, is the law really as they represent to someone reading the law, or is the pulpit doctrine, so to speak, that they got from their preacher in the caucus more accurate? And the fact is, anybody that has looked at these statutes and the statutory structure concludes that Tennessee is not a constitutional carry state, and it is unwarranted for any elected official or candidate for office to make the claim that it is.
Right. I addressed a similar subject with the school board here in one of my talks with them, which they don't like me to do. But anyway, when an elected official doesn't enforce or doesn't follow the law, it comes from a place of one of two places. It's either ignorance or corruption. So if you fix the ignorance by letting them know, hey, that is not the truth, then if they continue to operate that way, it's from a place of corruption. So it's ignorance or corruption for not following the Constitution or not telling the truth to their constituents. If they don't tell the truth, it's ignorance or corruption, and you can fix the ignorance. The corruption you have to expose.
Correct. And, we have on our website, because we archive it whenever we get opportunities, video clips of Senate Judiciary Chair Mike Bell, Senate Judiciary Member Kerry Roberts, House Republican Leader William Lamberth, who carried the bill for the governor, and even a radio interview that Speaker Sexton did with a Nashville radio host. All of those video clips or audio clips contain information where the person either directly says this isn't constitutional carry, but it is a step towards constitutional carry, which has got some truth to it. Or they otherwise make statements that support the conclusion that this 2021 law that the governor and others are calling constitutional carry falls short of what the Second Amendment requires. So, I mean, they knew, and we've got several of them on record. Now, the ones that are on record, particularly Senator Bell and Senator Roberts, were quite frank about it, that they were voting for the bill, which they did not call constitutional carry, because they did see it as moving the ball further down the field, using the terminology from Senator Bell. Speaker Sexton on the radio interview said that, it's better than where we were, but it's, we're still going to have to fight to get constitutional carry. And you got to wonder about that. I mean, this is the Speaker of the House with 73 out of 99 members being Republicans under his wing. And why is it he couldn't muster over a 2-year window that he's been Speaker 50 votes from caucus members to pass real constitutional carry?
Well, I really don't have to wonder. I know, because he doesn't really want it. Because that's the only excuse. If you have the majority in the caucus and you publicly state that you want to get constitutional carry and you can't, it's because you really don't want to. Because you can whip those votes.
Can be drawn. Yeah,
absolutely. So, what do you see as the biggest focus for your organization coming up this new assembly?
Yeah, we've got a couple of issues. We've got a long list of issues, but we got to prioritize what we think we can do. So we try to always focus on 3 to 5 that we think we can get in a cycle. And then as we get those, new issues surface, but we're looking at getting rid of this law. I mean, we can get to real constitutional carry in Tennessee by deleting one sentence. It's not a major lift. We delete one sentence, Tennessee becomes a real constitutional carry state. We want to get to that point. There's a lot of opposition to that from public officials, from the Tennessee Sheriff's Association, from the Tennessee Chiefs of Police Association, from the District Attorney's Conference, and from a lot of legislators who just don't think Tennesseans are responsible enough to have a real constitutional carry. We want to, under Bruen, get rid of as many gun-free zones as possible, particularly those that are on publicly owned properties like public parks, greenways, public campgrounds. All of those are gun-free zones unless you meet one of the exceptions. And really the only exception is that you're either law enforcement or that you have the Tennessee permit. So if you're carrying with the governor's permitless carry law, and you go into a public park or you walk in a greenway, you've committed a crime. Well, that's nuts.
Absolutely.
But that's one of our agendas. We want to fix these gun-free zone issues, as many as we can. We were on a bill the last 2 years that anybody that's watched the Kyle Rittenhouse case would appreciate. And there's 7 states, Florida is one of them, for example, running back to the George Zimmerman era, that have criminal procedures in place where a judge can, before you ever get to a jury, evaluate whether or not the state has adequate evidence to go forward with on the issue of negating whether a particular incident was self-defense. And we think that's critical legislation to pass because there is a tendency of these Democrat district attorneys, particularly in the major blue cities in Tennessee, to wrongfully upcharge people who've been involved in a self-defense incident in order to make the risk of staying in prison on a first or second degree murder charge so serious that they'll take a plea bargain to maybe a manslaughter charge rather than risk a trial. And so we saw the district attorney here in Davidson County prosecute a Metro police officer who shot an individual that was running away with him but quartered with a handgun. Officer shot and killed that individual. All the videos strongly suggested that it should have been a self-defense scenario. the DA here in Nashville charged him, a young officer, with serious homicide charges. And rather than risk, this young man and his family going to prison for 20 years or more, he ended up taking a plea deal where he spent about a year in a local jail, and he'll be out, I think, this December. But that's a travesty of justice, and it only occurred because Tennessee doesn't have a structure, a means to test whether or not, and to discourage district attorneys from these upcharging tendencies, and force these district attorneys to put up real evidence that they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury that it was not self-defense. And we run that bill 2 years. We got good traction on it in the House, but Senator McNally's leadership in the Senate just saw it go nowhere.
Huh. It's terrible that these elected officials cannot see the Constitution for what it is. I mean, it's plain language. It's written in plain language. The Federalist Papers that describe everything in it is written in plain language, but yet we rely upon modern interpretations to dictate policy that is antithetical to our Constitution.
Absolutely.
So who do you see as the best advocates that you can work with coming in this new General Assembly? I mean, if I get elected, I'll probably be your biggest one, but
we've got a number of people coming in, predominantly in open seats, that we think are going to help change the balance of the caucus. On the House side, we have had strong support, and we feel like they at least understand the issues, even if their peers aren't helping, from representatives like Clay Doggett, who's a chair of they're going to restructure, so we don't know where he'll be this year, but he was the chair of the Criminal Justice Subcommittee, Representative Chris Todd, Representative Jay Reedy, Representative Rusty Grills. And it's interesting that those are predominantly from West Tennessee, rural areas. The Republicans that represent places like Williamson County, Senator Johnson, we don't see a lot of support from those. It's the rural Republicans, like it used to be the rural Democrats, where we see Second Amendment support. We see some support from, on the Senate side, Senator Bailey, Senator Hensley, Senator Roberts. But, having some good sponsors just isn't enough if the leadership, if the caucus leaders, if the caucus chairs, if the speakers of their respective houses aren't on board to help, educate, using a term we've discussed already, their caucus members that these are constitutional mandates. These are not aesthetic decorations where they've got a wide latitude. The Constitution imposes threshold mandates, and we don't meet them in Tennessee at this point. And we haven't met them in Tennessee for in excess of 2 centuries now.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, so the leadership in both houses are failing in their duties to actually be educated on the Constitution.
Well, they may understand it, but they're not putting enough of a priority on it. And I think particularly Speaker Sexton understands it. What I don't know is why is there no mandate coming out of his office? Well, we haven't seen one the last couple of years that says, caucus members, this needs to be a priority of my leadership, my era as Speaker. And I want to see this. I want to see good bills put together, bring them to the floor. Let's debate them. Let's pass the right stuff. I'm not seeing that. Yes. Now, they did that when it was time to pass the $1 billion for Ford Motor Company, and they did that when it was time to pass, litigation civil immunity for the businesses and the manufacturers of the COVID vaccines, and they've done that in other areas, but they haven't done it on 10th Amendment issues, on 4th Amendment issues, on 7th Amendment issues, and critically from our organization's perspective, on 2nd Amendment issues.
Right. They don't do it on constitutional issues. They do it on economic issues.
Right. I mean, they've got a huge furor right now, if you look at your ballot, to amend the state constitution to remove a provision that restricts preachers from serving in the General Assembly. Well, yeah, it's been there, but nobody's enforced it for a century.
Right. And I just think, well, I've discussed these 4 amendments. The first 3 are just they're too vague in their language, and the 4th one was just added on there to make the first 3 palatable.
Yeah. You got to ask why all of a sudden, after 2.5 centuries of existence, roughly, does Tennessee need 4 amendments, 3 of which are really just window dressing? Right.
And they're very vague in their wording, and when you put up vague amendments, that leads up to interpretations later on down the line that is politically driven instead of constitutionally driven.
Right. I mean, a few years ago, the NRA came in here, and we did not support this. They ran a constitutional amendment on the right to hunt and fish. Well, on its face, hey, I would support a constitutional amendment that says the citizens of this state have a right to hunt and fish. I mean, that existed in the 1700s. It existed throughout the 1800s. It existed in much of the 1900s. And then TWRA comes on the scene and spoils it for everybody. But they took that constitutional amendment and they put squishy language on it that makes it so vague that it is a practical window dressing as opposed to a practical protection.
Right. And that seems to be commonplace with why change it? I mean, it baffles me. I think, I asked the question, who actually benefits from these amendments? And if it isn't the people directly, then don't do it. If it looks like it benefits.
That's so correct. And you look at that, Larry, and you got to just go back a few years to the Haslam administration, and they ran the constitutional amendment that and convinced Tennesseans to vote for this, which is so frustrating, where Tennesseans, as a matter of constitutional amendment, surrendered their rights to vote for the appellate judges in Tennessee, the Court of Appeals and the Tennessee Supreme Court. Prior to this amendment, our Constitution said the citizens have the right to select their judges. And the Republicans, under Haslam's leadership, ran legislation that took that away from the citizens and gave complete authority to the governor to appoint who the judges in the state the appellate judges would be in the state. So, and there's no excuse for that, and there's no excuse for Tennesseans to have looked at that and voted for it. And I submit they didn't look at it. What they saw was TV advertisements that talked about, from Republican spokespersons that vote yes on whatever the amendment number was. So that's all you hear from them. Right. They don't explain it. They don't go into the details. They just run an ad that says the Republicans say vote yes on 1.
Yep. It's always fishy. If you don't explain it, there's got to be a reason why it's not being explained. And if it takes away the liberty of the people, they should never approve it. Because why give up your sovereignty?
Right.
Well, John, it's been a real pleasure. I thank you for taking the time out of your day and talking with me here. And like I said, I hope to work together more closely with you here in the future. I mean, even if I don't win, I'd still a big, Tennessee Firearms Association. I'm a member of the Gun Owners Association of America, and I'm a big Second Amendment advocate. Like I've always said, it's plain language, and it's been interpreted by people incorrectly for generations now. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
So again, thank you for taking the time out of your day, and I hope you have much success in your advocacy here in the future.
Very good. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, John. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the interview. In closing, this week's wisdom from God's Word comes to us from 1 Timothy 3:1. Here is a trustworthy saying: whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. Mr. John Harris and his organization are engaged in a noble task. He and the Tennessee Firearms Association are exercising leadership and taking a stand in the arena in defense of our constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms. Those so-called elected leaders in our General Assembly that are opposed to protecting our rights are engaged in an ignoble task, meaning their work is of low character or low quality. It is not noble. Whose leadership do you desire more of? Those who engage in noble or ignoble tasks? We all have the ability to make that decision in the voting booth every election cycle. Will you take a stand in the arena with me so that I too can engage in the noble task of restoring foundational constitutional principles to our form of government, to restore servant leadership to elected office? Or will you allow the continuation of the same old, those that are more devoted to serving the moneyed interests that pollute and dilute our constitutionally protected rights, those that are engaged in ignoble tasks? Early voting is happening now, and Election Day is less than 2 weeks away. Each of us has the ability to choose whose side we stand on in our system of self-governance. Until next week, stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.